Greetings, everyone. Here are the main points of the video. Breaking. Russia plans a major new offensive, marking the most dangerous phase in northern Ukraine. Breaking news. Chinese ships use water cannons on Philippine vessels in the South China Sea. The US and Iran are aggressively retaliating against each other. The military base unleashed a rain of firepower in a deep raid into Russia's interior. A fierce sea of fire broke out in the two strategic provinces of Ulyanovsk and Bashkortostan, shocking and terrifying the Kremlin, sending a frightening signal. What harsh situation is about to unfold in Crimea? Welcome to the analysis program of Luan Banchin Su. Before we get into the details, I hope you can take a few seconds to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue. Thank you, dear audience. Breaking. Russia plans its most dangerous offensive yet in northern Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, in Eastern Europe, a new ominous shadow is quietly looming over the war. Intelligence data and battlefield analysis have all indicated that the Kremlin is urgently preparing for a new Pincer offensive, targeting the highly vulnerable northern front of Ukraine. This is not simply a direct assault aimed at immediately capturing key cities like Kiev or Chernihiv, but rather a deeply strategic calculation intended to tighten the noose and weaken the entire defensive system of the opponent. By concentrating forces in the north, Moscow is setting a strategic trap, forcing the Kiev government to face a dilemma, having to deploy reserves and thin out their forces along a long-stretched defensive line. This, in turn, creates favorable conditions for the Russian army to break through the defenses at other key fronts. At the center of this northern strategy, the key factor here is Belarus. Although Moscow is eager to turn Belarusian territory into a complete strategic springboard to open a second front, the reality is much more complicated than that. Director of Political and Legal Programs at the Ukrainian Center for Social Development, Ihor Zaitelevich, along with military expert Ola Zanov, shared that the scenario of Minsk directly intervening militarily and sending troops to the Ukrainian border is extremely unlikely. Even though they show loyalty to Russia through strong public statements, leader Alexander Lukashenko still fully understands the devastating price his regime would have to pay if it were drawn deeper into the flames of war. Mr. Lukashenko will continue to perform skillful political balancing acts. He is even wary of allowing Russia to use Belarusian airspace as a site to launch drones or conduct large-scale missile attacks. Still, a formal new front is unlikely to open. The presence of covert activities and the constant threat from the direction of Belarus remain a significant psychological and military burden on the Ukrainian military. Looking deeper into the actual numbers, the issue of troop strength is becoming extremely pressing for the Ukrainian command. According to the assessment of retired major military analyst Oleksiy Hemin, on the Kiev 24-channel, Russia is actively forming at least 5 new divisions and is expected to complete preparations by the time autumn arrives. To firmly defend about 160 kilometers of border adjacent to Russia's Vyansk province, Ukraine estimates it will need an additional 7 to 10 brigade-level units. This enormous military burden means that Kiev is forced to accelerate the pace of military mobilization by about 20 to 30,000 more troops. Additionally, there's the logistical challenge of rotating soldiers and constantly reinforcing units fighting for survival on the battlefield. The northern front is now a highly sensitive strategic point because of the long border. If Ukraine does not promptly build up its strategic reserves, the balance of forces will be seriously disrupted immediately. On the Kremlin side, internal political calculations are also narrowing President Vladimir Putin's military options. Expert Ihor Zaitelevich believes that Moscow will be unlikely to issue a nationwide mobilization order before the September elections. Instead, Russia will continue to intensify quiet recruitment drives and increase contract forces. Although this measure increases troop numbers on paper, it is unlikely to create a breakthrough or rapid change on the battlefield. When there are no longer many new tools of war, and the option of nuclear weapons is ruled out, Moscow is returning to classic tactics, large-scale war of attrition and pressure from chaotic infantry assaults. In this brutal battle of wits and strength, President Putin's determination to win at all costs is turning the northern border into a hotspot, where he is willing to sacrifice vast manpower to achieve his political goals. Chinese ships use water cannons against Philippine vessels in the South China Sea. On the vast and stormy waters of the South China Sea, the flames of tension have once again flared up fiercely, turning disputed shoals into a suffocating hotspot of confrontation between the parties. The tactical gray zone front has now been pushed to a new, dangerous, and brutal level, where clashes at sea no longer stop at pursuits and chases. The Philippine military has strongly accused China of a violent direct attack, in which a Filipino sailor was seriously injured when Chinese Coast Guard personnel approached and repeatedly struck his head with wooden sticks. This most brutal confrontation not only caused direct harm to people, but also severely damaged the small boat belonging to the Philippines. The tense atmosphere continues. It has reached its peak right in the sensitive waters around Scarborough Shoal. The footage released by the Philippine Coast Guard has revealed the scene of two ships coming dangerously close to each other at a breathtaking distance, just before the two Chinese Coast Guard ships. They directly fired high-pressure water jets with great destructive force at the Philippine government vessel. This water cannon attack was not simply an act of obstruction, but a show of force intended to assert control and completely push back any presence of Manila from this strategic reef area. On the other side, on the media and legal front, Beijing immediately released a series of counter-arguments to defend its actions. The Chinese Coast Guard claimed the two rubber boats launched from a Philippine vessel were the ones illegally stationed. They dangerously rushed at and rammed the Chinese patrol vessel. The sharp contrast in the reports from both sides, along with their actions, shows that the clashes are becoming increasingly violent on the ground, turning Scarborough Shoal into a powder keg. The line between a maritime incident and a full-scale military crisis is becoming more fragile than ever. Who do you think is telling the truth? The US and Iran are fiercely retaliating against each other. Military bases are being pounded by heavy fire, and the Gulf region is turning into a blazing inferno, where the cycle of violence between the US and Iran is erupting to an unprecedented level and completely out of diplomatic control. Behind the consecutive retaliatory airstrikes is a life-and-death battle to gain control over the global energy lifeline. The Strait of Hormuz is crucial for crippling Tehran's combat capabilities and reopening the vital shipping route for global trade. The U.S. Central Command has launched a series of intense strikes. They directly targeted Iran's infrastructure, navy, as well as missile and drone storage facilities. However, the flames of war have crossed the boundaries of purely military targets, as civilian infrastructure on both sides is increasingly becoming the target of bombings. In western Iran, waves of American missiles have rained down on key areas around the cities of Aitwa, Zamzai, and Endemiz. Even a devastating missile strike in the border town of Salam Chosap, Iraq, claimed the lives of two civilians, leaving behind scenes of destruction that have been widely shared in the media and on social networks. This stands as tragic evidence of the price that ordinary people have to pay in the confrontation between great powers. Showing no signs of wavering under pressure or threats from Washington, Iran immediately launched bloody retaliatory strikes targeting military bases. Against the U.S. in the region, Iran's state media channel Press TV declared that their forces had carried out a precise strike, completely destroying the Patriot missile defense system at a U.S. military base in Kuwait, at the same time causing heavy damage to the enemy's drone forces and countless pieces of military equipment. Though officials haven't confirmed it, Tehran's harsh statements reveal a harsh reality. The season of fire and conflict has now spread beyond Iran's borders, threatening the safety of the entire Arabian Peninsula. In the context where diplomatic efforts have completely stalled and the leaders of both sides are determined not to back down, the Strait of Hormuz remains under blockade, pushing the world economy and energy security into crisis, and a widespread crisis is unfolding. Speaking of deep strikes inside Russia, fierce fires have erupted in the two strategic provinces of Ulyanovsk and Baskot-Totan. The war is no longer confined to the bloody trenches on the front lines, but is increasingly extending deep into the strategic rear of the Russian Federation. In a carefully calculated long-range strike campaign, Ukrainian drones have penetrated air defense lines and attacked deep into Ulyanovsk province, a region far behind the front lines, about 700 to 1,000 kilometers from the conflict border. The target of this devastating strike was a key energy complex in Novosparkoy village, Novosparky district. Online images and videos show a tragic scene with intense flames and smoke. The main target was Neves Oil Company's liquefied gas storage facility. Although the full extent of the damage is still being assessed, Russian authorities have been forced to publicly confirm that a facility belonging to the fuel and energy complex in Novosparky district was attacked by the enemy. It is a private oil refining company that plays a vital role in the production of liquid fuel, specializing in the transportation of petroleum products as well as liquefied gas. Neves Hawaii is the energy shield ensuring supply for a vast region. The shock from this attack immediately triggered a chain reaction in Russia's aviation security system. The Russian Federal Air Transport Agency, Zosavia Zhedostoyevskaya, had to quickly issue an emergency plan and temporarily restrict flights at Ulyanovsk Airport to block the airspace against the risk of continued attacks. However, the scope of the rear front war did not stop at Ulyanovsk. In an even more remarkable strategic turn, drones continued to expand their attack range all the way to the Republic of Bashkortostan, about 1,400 kilometers from the main front. This time, the aerial strike targeted the infrastructure of Shaznev Uran Company, specifically the SAP Sapcon Kulovo production and operation station in the city of Tumezi. The continuous bombardment of energy targets and strategic oil pipeline systems deep inside Russian territory not only deals a heavy blow to logistics capabilities, but also reveals a harsh reality. The war of attrition is cutting deep into Russia's rear, turning distant industrial energy facilities into burning outposts amid the chaos of war. The Kremlin's shock and silence send a chilling signal. What devastating scenario is about to befall Crimea? In the bleak picture of the war of attrition, stern warnings from Russian internal military information channels are exposing a bitter truth. The firestorm is no longer limited to Crimea, but is spreading to major urban centers across Russia. Military analysis channel ZZ3, closely linked to the Russian Ministry of Defense, has issued a realistic message urging the Russian public to brace for increasingly fierce attacks from Ukraine. According to ZZ3, Crimea's current fate is a mirror reflecting the near future of many other Russian regions, as the government and regular army seem unable to protect every infrastructure target. The Ukrainian drone forces, with Western allies, have proven superior combat effectiveness and are receiving more abundant aid. ZZ3 predicts that drone strikes will intensify in the capital region and on vital transport routes like the M4 highway amid the national defense system's helplessness. ZZ3 bitterly recommends that businesses must pay to protect their own assets, from gas stations to warehouses and tax-paying facilities with social significance, by proactively funding local defense groups and military forces if they do not want to see their assets destroyed. This is the warning ZZ3 gives to Russian business owners. Adding to this perspective, military analyst Yuri Podolyak even asserts that Ukraine's attacks on logistics centers are actually a strategic plus, as they directly draw Russian public sentiment into the war, pulling them into the conflict as the leadership intends. The harsh reality on the rear front battlefield has violently collided with the propaganda wall of Russian state media, as Ukrainian drones hit warehouses of the Whiteberries e-commerce group, key logistics links serving Russia's military-industrial complex. The Moscow and Tambov regions have been engulfed in thick black smoke, with massive fires destroying facilities in Elixir, Moscow province, and Kotov, Tambov province, immediately exploding across social networks through numerous images and field videos recorded by local residents. However, on federal television channels such as Rossi's Osisa 1, Channel 1, or NTV, the picture is completely censored. State television stations absolutely do not broadcast any images or footage of the fires that are destroying the logistics centers. Instead, the cameras just pan across the screen, capturing official statements from the authorities on social media, repeating the familiar messages from the Kremlin to calm public opinion. This creates a stark contrast between the blazing chaos online and the artificial calm on national television. Behind the losses in infrastructure are tragic stories of people trapped between the tide of war and the indifference of the authorities. According to an investigation by the independent news site Vaznia History, based on conversations from the employees' independent union, a horrific scene unfolded right at the Wybris Logistics Center in Gaibachado when the attack happened. Instead of immediately activating the emergency evacuation procedure to protect human lives, the warehouse management blocked all exits, firmly refusing to let the workers escape. In area number 10, hundreds of workers were rounded up just to hand over their personal barcode scanners, even as the threat of bullets loomed over them. Management only began to panic when complex number 9 nearby started collapsing from the fire's destructive force. They escaped through a narrow passage with a revolving door, creating a panicked crush. Many frustrated workers broke open the heavy loading doors themselves to save their own lives. A witness, Nam's younger sister and a night shift worker, later confirmed this to the Post. She said management urged everyone to stay calm and tried to prevent escapes, despite a direct threat from above. Many workers have raised concerns, some claiming management intentionally locked them inside. Inside the fire, they only wanted to prevent the risk of goods being stolen during the chaos. It's a bitter example showing that sometimes human life becomes insignificant compared to property and the turmoil of war. Russia keeps trying to hide bad news, but it only makes Putin look foolish. Of the three hotspots, Eastern Europe, the South China Sea, and the Middle East, which do you think is most likely to spark a global crisis?